Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Miller.
And my name is Hazel Miller.
And we are the co-publishers at Book Hug Press. It is our great pleasure to welcome you all to the virtual launch of Tongues on Longing and Belonging Through Language, edited by Eufemia Fantetti, Leonard Carranza, and Ayelet Tsabari.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that the land we are joining you from this afternoon has, for thousands of years, been the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is still today home to many diverse Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, gather, work, and learn on this land. We also acknowledge that many of you in our virtual audience are joining from other locations, and we encourage anyone who wishes to do so to please share an acknowledgement of where you're joining from using the chat function found at the bottom of your screen. And if you are unsure of the history of the land under your feet, we highly recommend the online resource native-land.ca to learn more about the land you inhabit, the history of those lands, and how to actively be a better part of the future going forward. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, please also feel free to post a greeting for the editors and contributors in the chat.
We are really excited to be launching Tongues with all of you today. This vital anthology of 26 deeply personal essays opens a compelling dialogue about language diversity and probes the importance of language in our identity and the ways in which it shapes us. A recent starred review in the Quill Inquirer stated, astonishingly consistent in caliber, Tongues on Longing and Belonging Through Language is one of the finest anthologies published in recent years and should be required reading on syllabuses across the country. And I would just say required reading for everyone.
Indeed. So very quickly before we get underway, I also just want to go over a tiny bit of housekeeping for this afternoon's event. Live closed captions are available, and to access the captions, please click on the CC function that you'll find along the bottom of your screen and just follow the prompts. Secondly, today's launch is being recorded, and the recording will be made available for on-demand viewing on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And a quick rundown of the format for this afternoon. So very shortly, we're going to enjoy 4 readings from 4 of the contributors in the anthology. And after that, we will introduce the editors, Eufemia, Leonard, and Ayelet, to join us. And they will be in conversation with Taslim Jaffer, who's also a contributor in the anthology. The 4 of them will be in conversation together for about 20 minutes. And after that, Taslim will open things up to you, our audience. And so if you have a question for the editors, start to think of what that question may be, and please submit it using the Q&A function, again, found at the bottom of your screen. Oh, and I should say, sorry, that after the interview, my apologies, we'll have 4 more readings from 4 other contributors, and then we'll wrap up.
If you haven't already purchased a copy of Tongues, you may wish to order one or several directly from our website, bookhugpress.ca. Or of course, you can order it through your local independent bookseller. We'll drop a link to the book's product page on our website into the chat function throughout the event. And now, without further delay, let's begin.
So again, up first, we have 4 readings from 4 of the wonderful contributors in Tongues. So please sit back and enjoy readings from Logan Broeckaert, Janet Hong, Camila Justino, and Carrianne Leung. We hope you enjoy the readings, and we'll see you back here after that.
I'm Logan Broeckaert, and I'll be reading from my essay, Gender Fluent. Have you transitioned socially, the doctor asked. Had I, for example, come out to my friends and family as trans? Had I changed my pronouns? I didn't have a coming out story that was neat and practiced. I couldn't point to an email I had sent to my friends and family or a confession to Francis. I hadn't announced the transition to anyone because I didn't see surgery as a transition at all. It was just the next way I wanted to embody myself. I never talked about it like it was the end or beginning of anything. The doctor waited for an answer. I haven't come out, I said, and I'm ambivalent about my pronouns. He typed this into the form on the computer screen. I use the word genderqueer sometimes, I added, but it felt like I hadn't gone far enough. I guess I'm non-binary. It sounded like something he could write in my assessment, something that could prove my case. A few days after surgery, I FaceTimed my brother. He answered from his recliner. His face, angled so low I was looking up his nose, filled the screen. We had planned this call earlier in the day because my niece had a few questions. He flipped the camera so I could see her. She wanted to know if she should call me uncle now. There was a kid in Stambridge East, a few years younger than I was, who had mixed up uncle and aunt when she was first learning to talk. This kid, and all the kids that came after, called their aunt Uncle Shelley. I thought about Shelley as I looked at Ayla's earnest expression. She was growing up in Stambridge East, a place where queer was still an insult, and yet here she was, aged 11, asking about the language I wanted her to use. I didn't want to be called uncle. I hadn't known my own uncles well, but I remembered feeling close to and cared for by two of my mother's sisters. My aunts had been comfortable substitutes when my mum was away. I want you to keep calling me Auntie, I said to Ayla. I wanted to be the warmth for her that my aunts had been for me. In summer, after surgery, as I started to feel looser in my body, the trouble I had had talking about myself in the doctor's office came back. Gendered language became insufficient for the meaning I needed it to convey. I worried that saying gay lady or little sister or daughter gave permission to others to avoid acknowledging my transness. I worried I wasn't trans enough because I wasn't changing my pronouns. I got sullen and awkward, suddenly a 35-year-old boy with a real fear that my voice would crack any time I opened my mouth. It made conversation so hard I talked less. When I did talk, I was hesitant and vigilant. In early fall, in a conversation with Francis about a condescending window salesman who came to our house and patronized us, I asked, "Do you think he treated us like that because..." But then I stopped. What I wanted to say was because two women live here, but instead I said because no men live here, and suddenly it sounded like I was hiding something and I hated it. I'm Logan Broeckaert.
Hi, my name is Janet Hong, and I'll be reading a short excerpt from my essay, Release My Tongue. I have a complicated relationship with Korean. Call it what you want, mother tongue, native tongue, birth language, but whenever I'm asked about this relationship and its implications on my work as a translator of Korean literature and as a writer writing in English, something inside me stops short. For most of my life, I didn't question this resistance, this ball of yarn growing more and more knotted at the core of myself. I accept it as natural, simply part of my emotional makeup. It was only in my 40th year, in the history-making year of 2020, that I began the painstaking journey of unraveling the snarls. I was born in Korea, and Korean was the only language I knew until my father's job required my family to move to Seattle, USA, where we lived for almost a year, and then to Vancouver, Canada, where I attended kindergarten. As a kindergartner, I was exposed to a minuscule amount of English compared to the Korean I spoke and heard at home. While my English instruction wasn't enough for me to effectively pick up the language, it was enough to make me realize I was different, that I did not belong. In my kindergarten, there was a girl named Laura, a pretty girl with light brown hair. I think we were friends, or I wanted to be her friend. In one memory, a group of us are on our way out of the classroom. I call out to Laura, who is walking ahead. She stops and turns, her mouth set in a grin. "It's Laura, not Laura," she said with a giggle. I try, awkwardly curling my tongue to make the proper R sound, but my tongue is thick and stubborn. I try again. Amusement bubbles in the eyes of my classmates. "No, it's Laura," she repeats, and my heart sinks. I don't think she's trying to be malicious. She's pointing out differences, as children tend to do, but I remember the strain of my tongue, the suspicion that there was perhaps something fundamentally different about the composition of our tongues, and how, in the end, her name sat heavy and dull in my mouth, like a stone. Thank you so much.
I am Justino, and I'm reading a tiny part of my essay, Dear English Language. If you want to stay with me, stay truly. I'm owning this space, my brain, my mind, my body. And if you want to fool around, or if you want to represent me as a fool, I will laugh at you aloud. I will say, it's not me, it's the English who is fooling around on me. And don't be surprised if I say words you don't want me to say. Don't feel surprised if I don't repeat things you ask me to repeat. No, I don't want to be translated in the community center or in the doctor's office. And I will not say, sorry, I don't speak English. I will say, sorry, English is learning how to go through me.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann Leung, and I'm going to be reading from my essay, The Reach. Language is always about reaching. I have never belonged in language. There have been moments when I have found refuge, but language is a shifting ground, a churning sea, and never a place for me to land. When I was a child, I immigrated with my family from Hong Kong to Canada. My ability to speak Cantonese was interrupted, my tongue arrested and frozen in childhood. I never learned how to read or write, and this was the first loss. Years later, as a young adult, I would return to Hong Kong to live, and I fumbled to find words again. While my face allowed me entry to an optics of belonging, my capacity to express myself in Cantonese betrayed me every time. My stuttering, the long pauses in conversation as I tried frantically to search for the right word or phrase in my head, my tones always a bit off when I got nervous, and that childlike vocabulary always raised the flag that I may not be what I seemed. It was an unavoidable facing of a profound loss, and in the next 3 years that I lived there, Cantonese would always be a hard stretch, but one that was infused also with joy, when I found connection with the right word, the right time, and with the right person. It's a colorful language, full of vernacular, rich with vocabulary. I would sometimes find a place to sit. It could be a mall or a park or a street market. I would close my eyes and get lost in the sounds of the language around me and be soothed. Language is more than words, syntax, meaning. It is reverberation, it is energy, it is visceral. Language is a game of lost and found, but never to keep. This is a loss, but this is not a loss, but an understanding. As a child immigrant, while Cantonese receded from my life in Canada, I found English, and I also found silence. To me, English and silence are interwoven because I learned them at the same time. Silence grew into something else, something rich and thick and full of nuance. Silence floated around me, and I could easily pluck at it and shape it, disappear into the place inside where Cantonese was fading and English was flooding in. Silence was where things formed in between language and contained all my wanting and fears. It could hold all the things that I could not quite name, what was happening to me, my loneliness, the splendor of what I saw too. Silence did not let me down. And as a writer, I chase after silence and try to capture it in words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet, Logan, Camila, and Carrianne for those powerful readings. And now it's our great honor to introduce the editors of Tongues, Eufemia, Leonard, and Ayelet, along with our moderator for today, Taslim Jaffer.
Eufemia Fantetti is the author of A Recipe for Disaster and Other Unlikely Tales of Love, and My Father, Fortune Tellers, and Me, a memoir. She teaches at Humber College and the University of Guelph Humber and co-edits the Humber Literary Review. Leonard Carranza holds a PhD in social justice education from the University of Toronto. Her children's book, Abueleta and Me, is forthcoming in 2022.
Ayelet Tsabari is the award-winning author of The Art of Leaving and The Best Place on Earth, both of which were nominated for and/or won many prestigious prizes and accolades. She teaches creative writing at the University of King's College MFA, the University of Guelph Creative Writing MFA, and at Tel Aviv University. And lastly, Taslim Jaffer is a freelance writer and editor. As a first-generation Canadian parent, Taslim tries to pass down her Indian and East African heritage to her 3 children. She's currently pursuing an MFA in creative nonfiction, and her essay, How to Say Banana in Kiswahili, appears in Tongues. And we're delighted that she's agreed to join us today to interview the editors. Over to the 4 of you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so thankful to be a part of this anthology. As I was telling the editors earlier, it was kind of like, it feels like I've been invited to this fabulous dinner party. And of course, only the best parties have conversations on language diversity. So I'm really thankful to be included here. And I would also like to thank Book Hug Press for inviting me to bring this conversation to this virtual book launch today. I'm speaking from the unceded traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo nations, where I live and work and raise my children. And I'm grateful to be a guest here. And as I raise my children and teach them about their ancestral heritage, I also commit to teaching them to honor and respect the lives and teachings of the Indigenous people. So before we launch into our conversation, I just want to remind the audience that you also have an opportunity to be a part of this by asking your questions. So feel free as we're speaking to drop your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And we will get to that in just a little bit. Hopefully we can get to all of the questions, but we will do our best in our allotted time. Okay, welcome Ayelet, Leonarda, and Eufemia. It's so nice to be here with you today.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I wanted to start at the very beginning, which is the introduction of your book, which you beautifully co-wrote. And you mentioned that this book was something that you dreamt up together separately and collectively, which is very, when I read that, it felt very like a cosmic thing that happened to bring this book together. So I want to talk a little bit about your individual relationships with language. And I'd like to invite Leonarda to go first and just talk about your relationship with language.
Thank you so much. So I think, well, the 3 of us have been thinking about writing about and speaking about language for many years. For me, actually, the first piece that I published was about language, and it was titled Tongues. And it ended up being kind of the inspiration for the title of the anthology. And I'm in it, I'm exploring similar themes, things that are, you know, that as a child that came to Canada as an immigrant and had to learn English and experience shaming and exclusion while learning a language, I feel like I'm really interested in language and how it feels like belonging, or in the ways that language operates and creates barriers for people. So yeah, in Tongues, I wrote about my mom's experience learning English as a second language and the multiple ways that she experiences barriers and how it affects her life and our lives too. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. And I think I'm going to continue writing about.
Thank you. Yes, your story was really pulled at my heartstrings there.
Thank you.
Ayelet, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say something. As I was listening to the readings, I got so emotional. I was really, really moved. Like, it was just just being here right now, you know, and seeing this dream that we had becoming a reality, and, you know, we're launching it. Yeah, I kept grinning and having chills. Yeah, I'm really, really happy to be here. So thank you all for being a part of this. So yeah, it's interesting. To me, the experience of writing, I mean, obviously the experience of writing is tied with language, but for me, the idea, you know, starting to write professionally, it was something I did in my second language. So, you know, I started being interested in language more so when I became an immigrant, which happened later in life. But still, I felt the same, you know, I bumped against the same things of feeling misunderstood, of not feeling like I can articulate my emotions anymore, of not being able to be funny or to flirt or to argue, you know, or having people think, you know, you're less intelligent because they don't understand your accent, and all of that, all of this, you know, and that's a shock when, you know, moving to a country at the age of 25 and thinking you're coming already with a somewhat formed identity, and, you know, bumping against all this, and especially someone who, you know, I was already published, not in a book form, but I thought of myself, you know, as someone who had some command of a language, and then, you know, like losing it completely. It was such a humbling experience for me. And it did take me years to actually start writing in English, like almost a decade before I was ready to do this. It wasn't something I just, you know, fell into easily. And once I did, I became really interested. I also wrote, you know, essays about language and about writing in my second language. That there was one published in LitHub and so on. And I started toying with the idea of having a collection. You know, I think it's funny because Leonard had an idea of a different anthology about language, and I had an idea about a different anthology about language, and Eufemia had an idea, and we kind of just brought it all together into this anthology. One day I remember calling Eufemia and being like, it's one anthology, isn't it? Like, it's one anthology. And then I immediately called Leonard. I'm like, listen, like, we have to do this. And I remember it so clearly. Yeah, like we all came to it from different places, and then we realized that we can have a book that can contain all of these relationships and many more.
Thank you. Yes, like, I mean, what you say about language and the self, right? Like, they're just so intertwined. And when we're learning a new language, there are parts of ourselves that we can't communicate and express. It's almost like, does that person or does that part of us even exist in that new language? And so, Ayelet, your writing really blows me away, being written in your second language. It's remarkable. And I'm sure, I hope it gives lots of people hope who are learning new languages. And, you know, I just want to commend everyone who is learning languages, because it's difficult. So thank you for that conversation. And Eufemia, tell us about yours.
Right. So I think, yeah, so everyone will realize by the end of this launch that Ayelet's like 6 degrees of separation. We all need to play that, like who knows Ayelet and how Ayelet draws people in, because she's vital at bringing community together. And so I knew that this was a subject I was interested in and that I've always been obsessed with. So if there's even the remote like mention of language in something, I'm clicking on that article and I'm reading about it, and I'm like wanting to know about oral traditions and wanting to understand like who hasn't had access to language, because my ancestors could only communicate verbally and weren't given the opportunity to be educated in writing, because it was all about power and making sure that they never got power. And so I think it was through Ayelet that she sent me Leonardo's beautiful essay, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is, you know, it was massive inspiration. And then, yes, I was like, you know, I knew that some of my essays were about communication, and I'd been saving every article I ever came across about language. I'd been saving, thinking, I've got some ideas about things I want to say about language. And then it took like this genius of Ayelet to go, hang on a second, like what Leonard is talking about, what you're talking about, we could do this. And then the idea really picked up steam. And then we were really grateful that Book Hug got on board and saw the potential and gave us this opportunity to work with all these beautiful stories, because you could tell, like exactly what Ayelet was saying. You can't help but get emotional because there's so much invested in language, in power, in the violence of taking people's languages away, like what happened to the Indigenous communities here is just horrific. So I was always fascinated by the ways that language either formed my identity, or in two languages, like the Italian dialect that I speak or the English, and the ways that I'm different in those languages, and the way that I'm angry when people want to minimize anybody's intelligence because they have an accent. So those were things that were really important to me.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it really comes across in your essay as well. All three of your contributions to this anthology is just beautiful. And what you say about language as a weapon, or, you know, it's just, it comes up in some of those stories. And I have read the stories, but I took my time with them, because reading each one, you need that pause after to just kind of like let it soak in and just kind of experience it, because the writing is so beautiful in each of the essays that they really draw you in and make you feel. And language is just, as you know, as we've been talking about, it's just something that's such a part of us that, you know, it's very hard to read about someone else's language experience and not relate to it in some way. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad that whatever cosmic energy brought this all together through the three of you, I'm so glad that it all worked out and you listened to it. And here we are. Okay, so speaking of bringing this anthology together, that must be quite a process. You know, you are writers and you are now editors, editing other writers, and you had to select which stories to include. So who would like to speak first about maybe the joys and the challenges of this process? Okay,
you can go first.
Sure.
Sure. So I think it was like, let's say, heavy on the joys and less so on the challenges. Like definitely the pros outweighed all the cons, but I know for me, even just calling myself an editor is intimidating. So there was the intimidation factor of working with established writers, working with writers that were going to be new to nonfiction, ensuring that that in each situation we got the seed of the story that they wanted to tell, and we let that seed bloom and grow. That we weren't, you know, we didn't want to say, like, in some cases we approached people and said, we think this might be an interesting topic we've heard you mention or talk about. Would you like to expand it? We'd love for you to contribute to this anthology. And in other cases, we were just like, do you have anything you want to write about this? And get back to us. And then in that kind of way where the planets in the universe align and everything falls into place, everybody had something to contribute that didn't like overlap and take away from anyone else's. It's just kind of built this, almost like building a choir of this like incredible amount of different ways that we wanted to approach language, think about language. They're all gorgeous pieces where they're talking about the embodiment of language, but language and movement. So I think, you know, the process that was, I guess the challenge might have been a little bit the pandemic, but also that gave us time to focus a little. So, you know, we had a system that we worked out where we each were the first contact with a group of writers, like 5 or 6 each. And then we all worked on each pieces. And I know at the beginning, I thought, how is this going to get done? Like, I don't have the bandwidth to maybe do this right now in terms of what was happening in the world, but it ended up happening. It ended up being a really wonderful process of everybody sharing the workload and everybody being able to pick up wherever anybody else was like feeling like they didn't have it in them that week or that month. So, yeah.
So it was more teamwork rather than too many cooks in the kitchen. Great. Ayelet, do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, I wanted, just because you mentioned the pandemic, I think I can't think of a better thing to do, during a pandemic. It was a ray of light for us, in a really tough time. So actually it worked out in that sense. And yeah, just like Eufemia said, it worked way better than we thought it would. Before we started, we interviewed a few people who edited anthologies and asked them, what to expect. And one of the things they told us was, just expect that you may have disagreements. Makes sense, 2-3 people working together, you may have disagreements. I know you all friends, and just expect that. And then by the end of it, we're like, so no disagreements. It was kind of a blessed thing, the way it worked. Like Eufemia said, a lot of joy in a kind of a sometimes bleak period. Really lifted our spirit to work with each other and to work with the writers and get to read these wonderful contributions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to say, as a writer, that it was something that was a highlight for me as well during this time, and it kind of gave me a sense of community to be a part of a project like this. And also the pandemic did sort of make me feel more reflective and made me think about, things that I find important, like what are the important things I'm going to focus my attention on. So I'm sure the other writers could, can relate to that. Leonardo, do you have anything to add?
Very similar. I mean, I feel like I went into it not really knowing what to expect. And I think if people are thinking about doing an anthology, one thing, it's a lot of work. And it takes a lot of time. And I think just like what Ayelet said, we had the gift that we were working on it during a pandemic. So especially for me, certain things had really stopped. And so this was like a lifeline. And so it's a dream, right? For me, I love thinking about language and writing about it. And then here I can work with these two people who are really passionate about it, and then have all these incredible writers sending us their most beautiful work on things that I hadn't even thought about in the ways that they examined it. So yeah, I think it's such a unique experience that we went through with this. And I couldn't be happier with how it turned out.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're just coming to the end of this interview portion, and soon we'll tackle the Q&A. So audience, you still have some time to drop some questions in there. But I'm curious to know, what is something that surprised you the most in the process of putting this anthology together? Ayelet, would you like to start?
I feel like I used I already used my my answer. It's how smoothly it ran, how we had, we worked so well together. But there was actually one more thing. I think in the beginning we were worried about maybe, certain writers writing something that the topic would be too close to another, to someone else's topic. And we would have to tell them, well, actually, someone else already wrote about this, because that's another thing that someone told us, right? That may happen. And I think now I know that probably would never happen, because it's so personal, and there's just an endless amount of, ways that you can approach this topic. So yeah, that was not something we had to worry about at all, If anything, I think we need just, we need tongues too.
Yeah.
Because there's still so many other writers we want to hear from, and so many other reflections and meditations on language that I can read personally.
And I think the phrase that you use is language diversity is so true. Like every story is diverse in this anthology, and you're right, there's so many more to be included. So I will be looking forward to a tongues too. Eufemia, what surprised you the most?
All right, so what surprised me the most was how hard it was going to be to write my own essay. And I think I have the dubious honor of being the last one to write and send in her essay, right? I think so, because at one point I was like, it's not happening. The words aren't coming. I'm so frustrated. It was such a stressful time being an essential caregiver, the pandemic, a whole bunch of stuff. Meeting with these two once a month and reading the work that everybody was submitting was such a gift, such a godsend, that I was like, we got to I was almost like feeling like I was my own doomsday clock, like it was 2 minutes to midnight and I had nothing down. And this is on a topic that I've been meaning to write about for at least 8 years, that I've been taking notes and things. And then finally I was like, I was almost like, I think I was going to send Ayelet and Leonard the email that was like, save yourselves, leave me to die on my sad hill of ineptitude. I'll just be a co-editor and not a contributor. And they were both, they're both such brilliant writers and such gifted, generous people and they were like, you can do this, you can do this. So they really helped carry me during those times when I was really anxious and it still amazes me that it got done. I even had to ask Hazel to make some changes for me. Thank you, Hazel, because I was like really the 11th hour, so that my final edit at some point was like, I think I mentioned the word language 15 times in my essay, and my own inner critic was like, no, I can't. How can I show my face? How can I be this person? So yeah, that was the hardest part for me, was like really finishing my own essay.
Yeah, that it's hard to not overuse the word language in this type of an essay, but it was a beautiful essay that you did turn in. So, Leonarda, what's one thing that surprised you?
I think what surprised me, I was really nervous about editing other people's work, and especially that some of the writers in this anthology are really established and they have these really, powerful voices. So at times I felt like, well, what can I say? Do I really have anything that I can say? Like trying to find my own voice as an editor and being able to trust that. And so what really surprised me was the generosity of the writers that we worked with, and how kind they were, and how thoughtful and gracious they were to receive our feedback. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, the writer-editor relationship it can be such a beautiful thing, and I definitely felt that as I worked with you. Okay, so we are moving into the Q&A section of a portion of our launch here. So I'm going to start off while we wait for some questions to drop in. That beautiful, beautiful review that we had in the Quill and Choir, with that quote from Shanice about this book that should be required curriculum across this land. So my question to you is, why do you think she said that? Why should this book be required reading?
Because she's right. Sorry. Sorry. Anyway, I feel like this is a conversation that we've been having and other people should be having, in terms of considering what are people's background with language. And some of the stuff that we talked about when we were first just talking about this subject as something that interested us, was we'd all had experience of being shamed or being the elitism. And as people that are writers, these are the tools of the craft that you want to be masterful at and brilliant at, but you also understand, like, I don't like elitism. I don't like people being treated like, by the time I'm working with someone at the college level, they've already got these ideas about their levels of intelligence based on what they've been told about their writing. That should not happen. Or I've seen people treated as less than because of some of their sentence writing skill or something like that. And that just is, you know, there's a whole bigger system at play about literacy and ability, and whether you're being asked to participate in the dominant culture and their language, and what that does, and what obstacles there are, and what systemic barriers there might be for you. This doesn't happen just in language, it happens in mathematics. So I think it's one of those things where it's really important to constantly have these conversations and make sure that people are not being denied opportunities because of, you know, that in this country, over 200 languages are spoken as first languages that aren't English or French. And that's a huge thing to consider about where everybody's coming from and how will we connect with each other, because we need to be able to, through our ability to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. And I can say as a writer, I liked the opportunity of having my my peers, you know, read this, who maybe don't have the same thoughts as me about passing down language. So I think that having this widely read is going to be useful to all of us living here together, so that we can understand each other even better. Okay, all these questions are dropping in, so I'm going to start another question here. How have your own relationships with language / native tongues changed over the course of editing this book? That's a really good question. As you were reading all of these stories, did your relationship change with language? This is such a good question. They're going to need to write essays about this, I think.
I can start.
Sure.
So I feel for me, it was really deepened. There's a lot of things that I hadn't thought about, you know, the ways that, because I'm always interested in the ways you can be excluded from language. And it just made me think a lot about being more purposeful about the language that I'm speaking, like especially with my family, with my mom. Like I feel like I live so much in English, and I like, one of the things that stuck with me was this sense of work that it takes to maintain language, and also community, and how hard it is to do it in isolation. Yeah.
I just want to comment actually on your essay, Leonard, that it felt like you were working through stuff in it. You know what I mean? It felt like there's a journey within the essay. Like as you were writing it, there was some, as a reader, that's what it felt.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was. Yeah, I you know, like what happens sometimes with writing, like you start in one place, and as you start working on it, and so, you know, with Ayelet and Eufemia, they got to see the beginning parts of the essay, and so they saw how it moved and how it progressed. Yeah.
Okay. Another question that's come up is quite an interesting one. As editors, what advice would you give to writers wanting to break into the Canadian publishing market who think in the mother tongues and wish to write in those languages? So basically, I'm assuming this means like non-English language books breaking into the Canadian publishing market. This is going to be a big conversation. Is this, what are the possibilities of this?
Approach Hazel and Jay at Book Hug Press. I'm making it, but you know that not wanting to be cheeky, I want to be serious about it because that's an important question. I would say, you know, like what Leonardo said, you need community, you need the support, you need to find the people that will be there holding you up when you're feeling discouraged and stuff, which is what Leonardo and Ayelet have always been for me as a writer. And then this project just really cemented for me that I have been an incredibly fortunate person. Like I think Leonardo posted at some point that, you know, work with people you love and magic happens. And I thought that really succinctly said it. So if you can find other people that are passionate about the similar sort of the language, the culture, the whatever it is, because it's really, you can't do things alone. And it's a myth to think of a genius or the self-made person. Everybody does it with community. Everybody goes farther with community and support. And so if anybody is interested in doing an anthology, like we've got templates of things we've created, we'd happily share, you know, because you don't want to have to start from ground zero. You want like the support, and we got support from people giving us, like Ayelet did some research and gave us feedback. So there is you know, you might be going into uncharted territory or a new path with that language or that culture, but there are posts and signposts that can help you on that journey for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, and here's another question that's, you know, related to the process of putting the anthology together. How did you decide the order of the essays in the anthology? Leonardo, would you like to?
I feel like we read through all of them again, and then we were looking at the themes and how they flowed. And then one of the things that I really love that Ayelet had suggested was, once we had kind of each of us decided an order, like, so we separately thought, and then we came together to see if they matched. And with the first one, we were all like, yes, we all had the same first one. We're like, yay. And then one of the things that we were like thinking was the last sentence, to make sure that it flowed with the first sentence of the next essay. And it kind of like they were talking to each other. So I really love that.
Do either of you have something to add before we conclude this Q&A? Great. Thank you so much for answering all my questions and the audience questions. And again, for putting together this conversation in book form. And now we get to actually listen to some more readings I'd like to introduce. It's my pleasure to introduce Karen McBride, Rowan McCandless, Téa Mutonji, and Adam Pottle. So enjoy the next readings. Thank you very much.
Kwe Gakina, Karen McBride, Indigenous Makwato Dem, Timiskwing First Nation of Donjaba. Hello, my name is Karen McBride, and I'll be reading to you from my essay, Pimash Kogasi, Catching Language. I used to dance fancy at powwows when I was a little girl. I loved it, especially the spinning on the honor beats. I joined after-school groups where we were taught how to sing songs that honor the water and the eagle, and we learned to dance like crows and butterflies. Letting my culture live in my body this way was freeing. Sounding at the words to each song was like sipping honey, hesitant, careful, and delicious. With a drum in my hand and moccasins on my feet, I felt closer than ever to who I was as Anishinaabe Kwe. I would dance at ceremony and at powwows. I sang with our little drum group and I loved it. But even then, something held me back. I began to doubt my nativeness because I didn't look the part. As I got older, I became increasingly aware of the fact that my face didn't match up with what I was told was native. Now, I know that that thinking is a direct product of the colonial mindset, one that's been force-fed to Indigenous people for generations. A system that's been hoping to eradicate us has also been trying to define us for centuries. They tell us to stop being Indian, but also try to tell us that we aren't Indian enough. It's worked so well that even at 12 years old, I felt uncomfortable in my skin, and that I shouldn't speak my language or dance my culture because I wasn't enough. I remember we had an assembly at my elementary school where I was asked to dance with some of the other grade 7 fancy shawl girls, and when it was done, a kid in grade 2 came up to me and said, "You didn't know what you were doing, right?" I could tell. She didn't mean it to hurt me the way that it did. She even said it with a smile as if that was supposed to comfort me. I smiled back as best I could and said, "Everyone has their own style." It shouldn't have been the reason I stopped dancing, but I don't remember doing it after that. I'd felt closer to who I was as an Indigenous woman when I danced, but if it had been so obvious to some 7-year-old kid that I knew nothing about the dance, what did I actually know? So I stopped everything. I didn't dance, I didn't sing. I avoided ceremony, and I certainly didn't speak my language. The newly regained bit of my ancestors I'd found through the physical language of our culture had slipped away from me. It happened slowly, piece by piece. The shawl I created for myself unwound. Kachimi witch.
Hi, my name is Roma Candles, and the title of my essay is What Are You? A Field Study. Until the lion learns how to speak, all stories will glorify the hunter, an African proverb. A typical exchange setting, a physician's office at a walk-in clinic. Physician, if you don't mind my asking, what are you? Me, I'm Canadian. Physician, no, really, what are you? Me, I'm 8th generation Canadian on my one side of the family and 3rd generation on the other. Doctor, seriously, what are you? Where are your people from? Me, my father is black and my mother is white. Doctor, I knew there was something about you. End of exchange. What are you? Where are your people from? Translation, I'm uncomfortable in your presence, and I don't know how I'm supposed to engage with you because I can't tell your ethnicity. If I have an idea where your ancestors come from, I would know what category to put you in. 1. Questions and thoughts on what are you? For most of my life as a racialized woman, I've struggled to find adequate words to respond to the question, what are you? I found the English language profoundly self-limiting. There was no way for me to respond given my belief that the question itself implied the acceptance of race and racial divides, of being othered, and of taking on the discomfort of the person asking the question at my expense. I've often wondered how I could express myself when the question itself was reductionist. How could I express myself after being linguistically tongue-tied by Eurocolonialism? How could I express myself when there were so many native languages now lost to me? Field notes. The English language framed my understanding of the world, provided an outlook on the human experience, identity, and way of being. It relayed a tale of belonging or of being an outsider. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Téa Mutonji. I've got an essay in the anthology. It's called Comfort Language, and I'm having a really good mail week. I received this shirt from Victoria, which happens to match fantastically with the essay, and I thought that was so serendipitous and exciting. Okay, Comfort Language is divided in section. This is section number 2. Both my parents went to school, and my siblings and I watched Inuyasha. We would rock, paper, scissors, and sometimes watch Blade instead. Sailor Moon was reserved for the weekends. Animes were especially good because the characters used their bodies to speak. If you paid close attention to the way Kakome's face fumbled, you would know the words on the screen meant, "Stay with me." Before bed, my mother would tell me about her early evenings at the ELS Center, about the woman who reminds her of one of her sisters, about the long bus rides through Scarborough, how the world goes from green to yellow, and the occasional fireworks in daylight. Soon, my mother will graduate college and will get a full-time nursing job at a long care facility and become nostalgic about the smell of back home, the hospital floors where she once worked. Our pre-prayer night routine will be replaced by her homework. She'll sit at the foot of my bed, and I'll listen to stories of her patient, and I'll write them down on her chart and accidental reports. She'd ask, "How do you say this in English?" like a game of charade, showing me where the patient had complained of pain. Thank you. It is such an amazing honor to be in this company. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Adam Pottle, and I'm reading from my essay, Newborn. English does not translate directly into American Sign Language. Sign language grammar is closer to Japanese than to English. To ask, what is your name? In ASL, one says, name you, while lowering one's eyebrows. Facial expressions are as much a part of grammar as the signs themselves, and I had to keep this in mind while writing my play, The Black Drum. I wrote several different drafts. All of them were scrapped. They were too verbose, or the characters' motives were too unclear. There was either too much material for the actors, or not enough. I had to write according to how words look and feel on stage, not how they sound. To write the story properly, I had to let go of and rebel against my upbringing and my reading experience, all of which was based on hearing notions of writing. All my previous poetry and fiction had focused chiefly on hearing characters, and on a hearing perception of language. All of the poets and novelists and dramatists that I'd ever read had to be scraped from my mind. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Karen, Rowan, Téa, and Adam, for those beautiful readings. The time has come, unfortunately, that we have to begin to wind down what has undoubtedly been a wonderful event, one that we feel terrible having to end. Jay and I have a few words of parting, but before we say anything, we just wanted to turn it back over to our three wonderful editors first to ask if you as well would like to share any parting words before we say goodbye. Anyone, if you want to take it in turn.
I just wanted to say goodbye in Italian. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
No, go ahead. I want to hear you goodbye in Italian.
Mille grazie, ciao a tutti. Grande benedizione per tutti.
Beautiful. I just wanted to, reiterate how grateful I am, and I want to say thank you to Jay and Hazel and everyone at Book Hug. First for taking us on, with our little, dream project and believing in it. It was such a an exciting moment for us that you were on board and you made this happen, and there's a real book. So yeah, and yeah, I have one too. It made it. Yeah, there we go. Can you see? Barely. And also all the contributors, and Taslim, thank you so much, and my beautiful, wonderful, lovable co-editors. I love you in all languages, all the ones I can speak anyway.
Leonardo, do you have anything you might like to add?
Well, after that, how can I follow?
Hard to follow.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. It was such a gorgeous experience, and I don't know, we're just left feeling so grateful and so happy. And I have my two there here. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful.
That's been our pleasure.
And Taslim, do you have anything you might like to say before we?
Yeah, I was just going to say I've been catching up a bit here on the chat, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to read what an impact this book and this conversation is already having on those of us who've been touched by it, either as contributors or readers or listeners here today. Such an important conversation. And again, thank you for inviting me to sit at this awesome dinner table at this party. And yeah, I look forward to reading more thoughts on language as we continue connecting. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll just say just very quickly regarding the chat, it has been such a joy, as Taslim said, to read the chat throughout. And we've recorded the event, and that means that we also get a lovely transcription of the chat. So we'll be able to circulate that to all of you who've been busy, in conversation and not probably had a chance to read through it. So you'll all get a chance to see that. Jay?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as we come to a close, we do want to thank Eufemia, Leonarda, and Ayelet for bringing this really important and vital project to us. And as well to all of the 26 contributors for trusting us with their poignant and powerful essays. From the moment that the editors first reached out to us to pitch this anthology, we were totally hooked. It's been an absolute delight to work with all of you on this book, and it's our sincere honor to be the publisher of Tongues.
We're so excited for readers everywhere to read these essays, to engage with them. They're so timely and urgent. And as Jay said, just a tremendous honor for us. So thank you to the three of you for bringing this project our way. And thank you, Taslim, for such a wonderful job moderating the interview. It was just delightful to hear everyone in conversation, and we're really, thrilled that your essay is in this collection, and just so grateful that you did join us for this lovely dinner party.
Fantastic! It's been really a joy to be part of this. Indeed. And just a quick shout out to Alex Spears for managing the tech for us today. Thank you so much, Alex, as always. And thank you as well to Rachel Gary, who's our publishing intern extraordinaire, who's managed everything for us backstage in Zoom. And thank you as well to everybody who joined us today to launch this really wonderful book.
Indeed. And just a final reminder, I know that there's Rachel's dropped a link to the book's product page into the chat throughout the event. But again, if you have not yet picked up your copy of Tongues, you may do so directly from our website, bookhugpress.ca, or of course from your local independent bookseller. Please do pick up a copy, read the essays, think about them, talk about them. They're so important. So that brings us to an end. Sad. It's so sad. But thank you one and all. And please be safe. Stay well. Here's to when we may be able to one day do something like this in real life. But until then, we're so grateful for this opportunity to join together in Zoom land. And with that, we'll have a round of Zoom waves to take us out. And thank you to everyone. Take good care. Bye-bye.